I'm not going to do the whole victory lap. That would be unprofessional, guys. We're just going to go through this and talk about the situation that happened last night. And I warned everyone. I said, listen, Utah, they're more complete. USC's gotten very lucky. They've got a bad defense according to analytics. And it totally worked out that way. Utah, after USC, goes up 17-3. Caleb Williams, the injury, we will talk about that game in my official recap where I do my instant reaction. That'll happen tonight. When it comes to the updated playoff picture, it's very simple. Michigan is a lock. Georgia is a lock. Ohio State is a lock. And TCU, it's about a 90% chance, guys. The only way I see TCU being left out is if they get crushed by Kansas State. And I think you're going to get a big narrative to put Alabama into the playoff if TCU no-shows against Kansas State. If it's a close loss or if they win, obviously, they will be in. And what's going to happen when it comes to the seeding? First off, guys, let me just say this. When it comes to these predictors, it is so mind-boggling that we're 8 years into the playoffs and we still don't have a good predictor. ESPN's predictor is horrible. 538's predictor is horrible. There has never in the college football playoff era been a 2-loss team make the playoff. So why does a 3-loss Utah have a 25% chance? You have to factor that into your model, and then they have Kansas State with a 20% chance. So, guys, don't pay attention to this. This is just to show where everything is right now. But Ohio State, 99.9% chance. Michigan, 99.9% chance. Georgia, 99.9% chance. It gets a little interesting. If you are an Alabama fan, you want to be rooting for LSU today, because you lost by 1 point to LSU on the road. If LSU beats Georgia, that loss becomes a little bit better. You're rooting for TCU to no-show against Kansas State, and have a similar loss to USC against Utah. That is my opinion. Really, guys, I can't even use this because it's so messed up. They have Kansas State as a 3-loss team, a 46% chance. It's just not going to happen. Clemson is out. They're not making it. It really just comes down to, at this point, Alabama versus TCU, and I'm giving TCU a massive edge. Everyone that's pissed off that Ohio State is getting in, they're not playing, on conference championship weekend. Guys, I would just ignore it. It doesn't matter. They're just trying to drum up attention. No one's going to remember it if Ohio State comes back after getting embarrassed at home against Michigan and beats Michigan. Now, the other main key that we're watching, would they do a Michigan-Ohio State rematch? Well, if history tells us anything, they're going to really want to avoid a semifinal rematch. And I do agree, in the fairness to Michigan for going on the road and beating Ohio State in Columbus, you do want to avoid a semifinal rematch if you can. So there's 2 ways to do that. Obviously, if TCU wins, you're perfectly fine. You've got Georgia 1, Michigan 2, TCU 3, Ohio State 4, and we all expect the Ohio State-Georgia game to be the Peach Bowl, the Michigan-TCU game to be the Fiesta Bowl. That's the betting favorite right now, this morning. The other thing that could happen, let's say TCU loses or gets blown out or something to where they have to be knocked down below Ohio State. If Michigan is impressive enough against Purdue and Georgia maybe struggles a little bit against LSU, they could just move Michigan up to number 1. And if TCU loses, they move TCU down to number 4, and Ohio State's at 3, Georgia's at 2. It's the same exact scenario. So I do think they're going to really try and avoid it. It gets really finicky if TCU gets crushed, something crazy happens, they lose 49-14, because now Alabama comes into the picture, and that's really when there would be no way you can justify Alabama being above Ohio State. So Alabama would be locked into the number 4 position, and you would have to, at that point, move Michigan to number 1 if you wanted to avoid an Ohio State-Michigan rematch. When you look at TCU versus Alabama, guys, the issue for TCU right now, the FPI, I mean, it has them at number 10. I will say, and this was surprising when I saw it. It actually, maybe it's not surprising because the Big 12 has no horrible teams. TCU's strength of record is number 1 in the nation, which is a huge indicator on teams making the playoffs. They have the number 1 strength of record in the nation. So I think for TCU, as long as it's not a blowout loss, you are in the clear. And obviously, a lot of people thinking TCU will win this game outright. They'll go to 13-0. They'll stay the 3 seed. But, you know, it becomes an issue if they get blown out and they look bad. You're going to have a debate. You are going to have a debate for sure. That's just the nature of college football. But if it's a close loss, if it's a win, TCU is going to be fine. And I'm guessing if it is a close loss, they will just stay at number 3 because they're not going to want to have the Ohio State-Michigan semifinal rematch. So right now, guys, I would say we're looking at a 1v4 Georgia-Ohio State matchup and a 2v3 Michigan-TCU matchup. That is the most obvious situation. Alabama has to hope really for 2 things. LSU to beat Georgia because that would help them with their 1 loss. That would help them with their strength of schedule, their strength of record. Well, actually not their strength of record because they lost that game. And they would also need, this is more important for Alabama, TCU to get utterly blown out. That is what they would need to have a chance of passing TCU. Of course, it is weird because think about this for a second, guys. TCU already beat Kansas State, so they have that quality win. Right now, Kansas State is number 10. If Kansas State beats TCU, Kansas State is just going to move up even more. So technically, TCU's best win would get even better, because Kansas State would move up and TCU already beat Kansas State. I know, obviously they would also have a loss to Kansas State, but it is something interesting to note. And look at the ELO rating. TCU, they love it. Guys, but look at this. This is what I was talking about. You see the ELO for USC at number 19. You see the FPI at number 15. The problem with USC was always their defense. I said going into this week, Utah is the more complete team on offense and defense. Caleb Williams is the best player, but Utah is simply more complete, and they have a good enough offense to win this game. They really were undervalued by people. The line opened USC minus 1.5. It got all bet up to, I think, -3 at one point. And I said, listen, Utah on the money line, they're great value. I tweeted out when they were losing 7-3 that, this is great. Get them at plus 280 or whatever. I'm trying to help people out here because it's a situation where one team is better than the other. And guys, I think we all know if Michigan and Ohio State played in a rematch and it was a pick'em, I mean, you want to talk about the bet of the century. Oh my God. Ohio State, guys, this is not me being an Ohio State fan, or whatever. This is just, a neutral fan. I mean, if it is a pick'em between Ohio State and Michigan in the national championship, I mean, we might have to move. We might have to go to Mars or something with the amount of money that we would win from betting on Ohio State. There's not a scenario in the world Ohio State loses a rematch to Michigan. And that is just, from a college football fan, that's the way that Ohio State lost to Michigan in their last meeting. That's Jackson Smith and Jigba paired with Marvin Harrison Jr. And that's nothing against Michigan because, listen, I would be pissed too if I was a Michigan fan having to face Ohio State again after you already beat them on the road. Certainly. I'm sure Michigan is hoping Georgia beats Ohio. Well, I don't know. Maybe Michigan would want to face Ohio State over Georgia. Maybe they would. I don't know. But it's very clear that there's no super great teams. It'll be interesting to see how Georgia performs today. Along with Michigan, we know now Blake Corum is out. That is very sad and really unfortunate because Blake Corum very easily could have won the Heisman if he had stayed healthy. the Heisman for sure. A lot of people speculating, would Caleb Williams still win it? Guys, Caleb Williams is definitely still winning the Heisman. If you don't know how the Heisman voting works, I would say a good 30 to 40% of the voters vote before conference championship weekend, and everyone before conference championship weekend would be voting for Caleb Williams, and I think a lot of them still will. Caleb Williams, I mean, you get blown out. That's bad, but his numbers were not that bad. He's going to win the Heisman. I think when you look at the total composite and how he led USC this year, even with the 2 losses, even with this game, there's just nobody else. Guys, this year would have been the perfect year to give the Heisman to a defensive player, but there's simply no defensive player that's worthy. If Will Anderson had last year's stats in this year, he would be the unanimous Heisman 100%. But there's just no defensive player that is worthy of consideration for the Heisman. I think it's so clear that Caleb Williams is going to win it. CJ Stroud, no chance. He's gone. And then, Blake Corum, the injury. Hendon Hooker losing to South Carolina and being injured. That hurts him. I think Hendon Hooker should be invited for sure. Tennessee had a great year. He had such a breakout year. That was so cool to see. But Caleb Williams will win it. So, guys, this is the situation. It comes down to we're very likely we're seeing TCU in the playoffs. But if TCU loses no matter what, they're going to drum up something and say, should Alabama make it because they need ratings. As long as it's a close enough loss and TCU doesn't look like a dead fish, they will be in. And there's no argument for Alabama to be in front of Ohio State. Alabama has worse wins than Ohio State, and they have more losses than Ohio State. There's simply not a single argument. So Ohio State will be above Alabama no matter what. It just comes down to TCU making sure they don't get crushed. And guys, let's be real. If you're a Michigan fan, you want to face TCU instead of Alabama. Let's be honest about it, okay? So if you're a Michigan fan, you need to be rooting for TCU to at least keep the game close. And, you want to face them in the first round in the Fiesta Bowl for sure. And Ohio State, they're going to have to face Georgia. That's the price you pay for losing to Michigan, certainly. I'm sure Ohio State is just happy to be in at this point because if USC would have won, it would be completely different. So that is the updated look right now at the playoff. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.